Wi-Fi connection in here? Are you wired in?
I've linked into the Wi-Fi. It is free. I think you can just go in.
Or CPI open?
Or CPI. I think I don't think you even need a password. Because I'm streaming it, just to connect into this.
Connect to the open one. There's two with passwords and after. Two.
Yeah, he's leaving. Yeah, so really when I'm I can so Des is going to be gone, so I'll do the closing as well. Exactly. I'll be good. Yeah, like it's very nice. It's just a new event, so sorry, like it's just such a crowded space, but it's always the last 2 weeks are kind of the ramp up anyway, so try to
Yeah, that's fine, yeah. I don't feel it's kind of in any way helpful. I didn't know you were sharing or you were because I know the yeah, okay, that's absolutely do you want the fact that you're going to 19 yeah, that was a bit vague. No, I think it's better.
The cost of creating this model, and of course it is. And who's responsible for its accuracy and maintaining it over a long period? Calls up again, professional indemnity insurance, who ultimately is responsible. All property professionals need to educate themselves and prepare themselves to adapt to all these changes, and particularly the introduction of the code there. And in that sense, I suppose I'm preaching to the converted, because when we come here this morning, or probably earlier, doctors are certainly interested in the topic. BIM has been talked about for so long now, and it's only now beginning to see some real traction in the industry. And who's adopting it? Well, the recent announcement of the GCC for public contracts, we know that will push it along further, and we can all see the benefits, and certainly longer term holders of assets will see the benefits. Trying to convince commercial clients of its benefits can be difficult enough, particularly some people flip an asset. And it was interesting, somebody mentioned me just before I came up, that they're in the build to rent space, where they'll be holding an asset for 20 odd years. So this is a commercial development. So that is one of the areas where you need to get out there, probably, and convince developers as to what the long-term benefits are. In terms of the valuation of the asset, at the moment on commercial projects, it's certainly not necessarily realised. And that is one of the big challenges, I think, facing the world. You're all going to have to invest probably more time and more money, both in technology and in just developing your knowledge of the subject. And what does that entail? Well, hopefully the presentations this morning will throw a lot more light on that. What are BIM's strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats, more particularly the risks associated with the varying different levels of understanding of the stakeholders. So I think risk needs to be addressed. There are very clear long-term benefits for the management of information, its use, initially the prevention of errors and clash detection. But more developed for end users is probably the whole life cost of facilities management that follows on. Clients in both the public and private sectors have this idea that they need BIM. And construction professionals need to inform clients as to what they need. Not necessarily sell them what they don't need, but to try and identify what is of actual use to the end user and to ultimately the private developer. Like all advances in technology and the sources, the use of data is very much part of that journey. And I hope the presentations this morning will go a long way to informing that much needed debate. And with that note, I'm going to hand you over to Apple. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Des. So I'm just going to be introducing and chairing the session today. So thank you very much to Des as president of the SESI, giving us that, I suppose, those introductory words as to what we're going to start to look at this evening, or sorry, this morning. It's evening for me, so I'm still up quite late this morning. So I'm just going to announce a slight change in the running order on a number of items. So our first speaker this morning is going to be Gary Comfort, because he has some risk and reward of his own to get away to. So we're just going to slot him in at the beginning of the sequence, and then our wrap up is going to be by Dr. Alan Hoare, as opposed to Des, because he too has to get away. So I will introduce now to you Gary Comfort, who's an Associate Director at Blindside, and he's going to talk about BIM, risk and opportunity.
Good morning. You see so many people turning out so early. Apologies for the slight missing of the running order, but something has come up that I have to address and need to get away. I've been allocated half an hour, but I probably won't take half an hour, so if there's any questions anybody hasn't yet, in the next part I do, rather than wait to the Q&A session that I won't be here for, you might just address it, maybe we might spend 5 minutes dealing with it. Then as the event was called, risk opportunity reward, I thought somebody should actually deal with those, so I'm actually going to deal with it. It's from my perspective as a QS, so I'm not sort of preaching. It really is what I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, really been involved in projects where BIM has been heavily used, and really just really the outcome of that process. Okay. Obviously, the thing I'm just going to touch on, I suppose, our view of the line-side digital journey from when the company was formed really to where we are now. I'm going to touch on risk, and I suppose key potential risk associated with the new process as I see it, areas of opportunity, and finally then I'm just going to just have a look at the concept of reward and what that means to us. The line-side digital journey was formed in 1975, and I suppose by way of introduction I just took some key events from at various points along the journey and actually just looked at the information to the can issue model at tender stage the contractor will use it against us. It is the reservoir of the data, like as to why you would produce all that information and not make it available to the contractor to allow him to better understand the project is something I still quite haven't got my head around. I can understand the risks, I can understand why people have reservations about that, but I really think the contracting organisation needs to again come in and understand that this is not a tool that you use to attack the project. It really is there for the benefit of the project. And post-contract change management again. Most projects now have the BIM model will transfer over. The management will make transfer over to the contractor at a contract stage. How are post-contract changes managed? Who does it? Does the design team do it? Does the contractor get paid for doing it? Who owns the model? Who maintains the model during the construction stage? Again, these issues we have debated on a number of projects, and there's no conclusive process in place. It still is an ad hoc basis. BIM certification. Demonstration of BIM capability is going to become a major issue for the industry across all the professions. So the other question is, what does certification mean? Does certification mean you have a process? Does certification mean that you are qualified up to a certain level? There's also the potential that of exclusion from public tendering. It's going to become an award criteria. It may become the exclusion criteria, that if you cannot demonstrate BIM capability or BIM certification, you may not be allowed to tender for public contracts. So then that is something again that the industry needs to get to grips with, and needs to come up with a way of actually dealing with that. And model development and the BOQ, and again here I suppose I'm starting to look at the QSs. I suppose we need to, at whatever level, we need to have a better understanding of the model and the model development. And we can probably all look at a set of 2D drawings at any stage of a project and figure out, yeah, you know what, those drawings are up to standard, or they're not up to standard, or identify the issue with them. You look into a model, it's very difficult to figure out as to where it is in the process. What stage it has, is it good enough, is the level of detail, is the level of information available. Understanding the relationship between 2D and 3D. Not all the information is still being produced in 3D model, there's still a significant amount of 2D information that supports the process. And again, it's understanding that, and really being able to, I suppose, ask the questions at the right time, at the various stages of the project, and understand where we are and what information is appropriate for each stage. I suppose the analysis of design clashes again is something maybe where the QSs can step in and actually understand it. And I'll touch on it later in relation to what we should be getting at. But designing in clashes is really not something that is right. And just because it was there in 2D doesn't mean that we should leave that as a legacy in the 3D process. There's nothing else that we get out of the BIM. I think that is something that we should be aiming for. The other thing is, measurement is not just a QS thing. I know we are responsible for production of bill of quantities, but I think the project really needs to understand the implications of the bill of quantities, and particularly bill of quantities now that are going to be based on 3D information. Public Works Contract 2016 changed the status and primacy of the bill of quantities. It is now where issues are going to arise. If the measurement is wrong, the quality of the bill is wrong, or the quality of the information which the bill is based, these issues will arise. And these are issues for the project, because if you have €1 million issue on a project, it's everybody's issue, it's not just the QS's issue. And particularly in relation to QS's and M&E measure, again, in the Public Works, again, there's a requirement there for measurement of M&E. And therefore, the M&E engineers need to understand that how M&E was measured 2, 3, 4 years ago was different. And just because contractors were deemed to include for something 2 years ago, they're not now, and we need to understand that, and we need to change how we prepare the design information to cover off these issues. Finally, again, just to say is that change equals cost. So if things are not captured in the bill, if things are not captured in the design documentation, will result in change and will result in cost. That is the one fundamental that has not changed no matter what process we're actually operating. Yeah. BIM it's more than 3D, and again, I suppose it's understanding that BIM is more than a process. It's a process as much as anything else. And again, people talk about collaboration, but I think collaboration is a word that's probably overused and actually under-delivered on. Again, the production of the information, the production of the model file is 2D, but that is the data. It's how the data is prepared, how the data is consumed is hugely important. And again, it's not just about producing a deliverable. We're very output-focused industry rather than an outcome-focused. And I think people say, I've delivered the drawings, I've delivered the spec, I've delivered the bill of quantities. But really, we don't actually take a step back and look at what was the outcome. Because I said outcome is really what this is about. It's not about outcome. It's all about deliverables. And again, I suppose it's bad BIM. I said, doesn't make any difference to put bad design, bad BIM. It's going to result in impact to duration, impact to quality, and impact to cost. And there's no way about it. So again, we all need to understand, we all need to challenge each other in relation to improving the process and improving the quality of the documentation and the process as much as anything else. 3D silo. So one of the aims and one of the objectives of the BIM process was to get everybody out of the silos and get everybody in the concept of the big room with the big environment where we could all share. But as far as I can see from what we've done is we've all stayed in our silos, but they're just 3D silos rather than 2D silos. And in fact, there's an argument to say that we've created far more silos because as well as having silos between the teams, there's now silos within the teams. I see that the mechanical and the electrical are siloed. The ventilation and the chilled water are silos. And again, everybody's just working in their own little silos. And that is actually, in some cases, is adding to the risk and adding to the difficulty of the process rather than actually solving it. And I suppose classifying this, again, should be part of the process. We shouldn't be designing in clashes into a process. And just because we were able to, is the term, get away with that, or that would happen in the 2D world, we now have the tools available to us to allow that and to apply that. Because it says, if a clash is designed in, somebody has to fix it in the field and fix it in the model at a later stage. And that really is going to just add to time and add to duration. And I suppose finally, just for this section, is we talk about risk. Risk, I suppose, it manifests itself, I suppose, in disputes, which manifests itself in costs. And again, we should really try and mitigate or remove risk as much as possible in the process and avoid dispute and hopefully avoid the impact on costs. I haven't said all that. I said I'm a huge supporter of this process and a part of it. I think we need to, I suppose, I think those issues are resolvable, and I think, I suppose, looking at the flip side of that, it really is about the potential opportunities, and for individual teams and for the teams in general. I think for QS, I think that there's an option, I suppose, of managing the digital twin. Nobody is managing it at the moment. We don't quite understand is what the cost of BIM is at any stage, at the design stage, at the construction stage. Nobody, I haven't been able to meet anybody yet who can say, BIM on this project cost X hundreds of thousands. We haven't been able to do it, even at the design stage. Clients can't do it, design teams can't do it, contractors can't do it. So without understanding the cost, we really can't understand what the value is. And without being able to demonstrate value, clients are actually going to be very reluctant to say, well, why should I have it on my project? What value is it bringing to me? Why am I paying for it? So I suppose that really is one of the opportunities that if we can actually start establishing what the costs are and establishing what the value that is bringing to the process, I think that really is an opportunity which I think will help move this along. A coordinated project. I think one of the things, if we've got nothing else out of this process over the next few years, that at tender stage we had a coordinated project available, I think that would be a significant impact and a significant benefit. I said it would probably be fundamental, because at the moment what we are doing is we are, I said, models have been prepared and that there are clashes embedded within the project. As the result of that is we are paying contractors to solve the clashes in the field and then ultimately then go back and update the BIM models to reflect those fixes. There is no need for doing that. I said we have the ability now to build the building, build the project digitally, and then build it physically in the field. I think if we get nothing else out of the process, I think that is an opportunity. And again, it will significantly move this process on. So the idea of improved value, the UK set a target of 50% reduction in overall project duration. Now in Ireland the target is 20, and both have a target of 20%. The problem is at the moment in the environment that we're in, it's quite difficult to demonstrate cost reduction because costs are rising so fast across all sectors. So we could be achieving value, we could be achieving value where we were 2 or 3 years ago, but because it's been outstripped by inflation, it's actually quite a challenging analysis to do on it. But I think it shouldn't stop us or it shouldn't prevent us from doing it. And again, if we can actually do that, demonstrate it, I think more and more clients will actually take up, will take up and will feed into the process. I think better engagement with contracting authorities, I think, is important. So the public sector is going to be, from a mandate point of view, is going to be one of the drivers in this. I think because they are clients that have multiple projects across multiple sections, and they are developers that are here for the long run. I think so they are going to be a main driver. So I think Clinical professionals probably need to get in, there's an opportunity there to get in with the key contracting authorities. Startup group protocols, startup group procedures that will become the standard across the industry, because I think individual clients and in the private sector, they don't have the interest and don't have the ability and don't maybe have the long-term view that the public sector have. So I think there's a huge potential opportunity there that we can use them to actually leverage some of this. Improved project analysis. So it's the first time now we have a huge, particularly as surveyors, we have a huge amount of data available to us. And rather than just use the quantity to produce models, produce design, I think for the first time we can carry out some significant data analysis. And I think we should be doing it, and we're not doing it. I had a conversation about a year ago with an architect relating to maybe the potential benefits that we could do on facade analysis on a project. I said, if you only do this and this and this into the model, it will allow us to sit down with you in real time and do optioneering on the facade, and we can spend the day doing it, and we can look at the facade and because do some real proper value engineering as opposed to the value engineering that we have just to save money. And the response which he said to me, and it still stunned me, because I still can't believe he said to me, he said, if I do that, I will be doing your job. And he missed the point completely, because what I was trying to get to him, I said, if you do that, I can help you do your job better. And we can save money, and we can improve design, and maybe you can get the nice fancy facade entrance that you want, because we'll be able to afford it. Didn't get it. Didn't understand it. But we have the information, and I think we should actually do it. We should do real-time analysis. One of the things that we can do, particularly in the public sector and involved in hospitals, is area analysis. It tends to happen at the end of every stage. I think now we have the ability, every time a model is issued, there can be an area schedule attached to it, we can track area. Area on hospitals is the fundamental driver of costs. And I think for the first time now that we have that ability to actually do it every time a model drops, every time a model drops now, we actually do the analysis itself, or it could actually drop with an area analysis to it. And again, so you effectively have real-time information, clients can actually do it, see where the impacts are. BIM versus ARM4. Again, I mentioned the bigger quantities earlier on. I think there's a piece missing here, because obviously the codes that the architects use and BIM and ARM4 measurement are not coordinated. I think there is certainly an opportunity around actually improving that process. All the measurement tools we use all have the ability to accept codes, and again, this will feed into the data analytics that we use and provide better analysis. And it will help improve the quality, because again, for architects and engineers get into the habit of actually coding up doors, fire doors, and partitions in a particular way to tie in there. It will just become the norm, and it will mean that we will have better models, we will have better builds, and we will have better outcomes. Additional services. Again, I think there is a huge opportunity now for us to actually to roll out additional services to clients, give them better information, not just about drawing specifications and builds and quantities. And I think really this is probably where I think we as a profession need to look at what we do as surveyors and consider the options that we can actually do and deliver better projects. BIM project control is an area that is linking the model to the schedule and to the bill of quantities, and actually have that in real time so that we can actually track expenditure and actually plan expenditure on a project if the model and the bill of quantities and the schedule were actually linked. Finally, reward. I suppose haven't touched upon the opportunity, and I suppose in looking at this and trying to figure out, well then, what is the reward? And I suppose took a slightly different view on it. And it really was, for cost and coordination clients, this is really, I suppose, an example that's taken from a project where there was one duct, 34 clashes, and the estimated cost 7,000. And I said, that's just an example, and I suppose I said, if there was a reward for every time anything was fixed, I think they would be fixed pretty quickly. So I suppose, again, it is looking at BIM, looking at the information, how we actually deal with it, and actually deal with it differently. Rather than pay a contractor €7,000 to fix something, wouldn't it be so much easier that if the architect or engineer was paid €1,000 to fix that, or to get paid fees? And I know this is about fees and understand that, and this is maybe where clients actually need to understand is their fee structure and what they're paying for, what is more important, where is the benefit, and again the feedback to do the value analysis and demonstrating to the clients as to how we can deliver value. But I think this is certainly one of the things. There is no point for employers paying huge amounts of money to contractors to fix things in the fields. Contractors don't want to be wasting time and money fixing that in the fields. They're out there writing the model and the building right the first time. So that's it. That is my view of BIM. Does anybody have any, because unfortunately can't stay for the Q&A session, so if anybody has any questions, I'll take them.
Is that system compatible with the IPMS as well? See if that you said it works with Norm 4?
What's
the International Property Measuring Standard, the IPMS?
Well, it can, yeah. As I said, at the moment, the problem that we see, we don't have any, there's no, from a request point of view, is that the measurement and the models are not linking, are not talking to each other. Coding.
Yeah, international measurement program, we're going to get that.
Because it would make sense, from a surveyor's point of view, if it all feed into each other.
Yeah, and I think this is, I suppose, one of the points I'm trying to make is that we have a huge amount of data, and if you can just join the dots, you know, it will make everybody can dip in, everybody can have the same information available to them if the codes are there from day one. I said whether it's severe, whether it's a building surveyor, whether it's an engineer. If we all have, if the codes are in the model from day one, people actually can understand that. I think rather than trying to retrospectively apply them or pull out data in a particular way, they're trying to make it work.
Yeah, Gary, very, very interesting presentation. I really think what's needed here is, I was very honest, I think, with you. I mean, I remember 30 years ago being at an event in London where they talked about the demise of the QS. You know, we're still here, yeah? But you talked about silos and so on. I think there's a real opportunity here for the representative groups of the CIC to collaboratively commission a project, call it the National Digital Twin Project. So the SCSI, ACI, engineers, RCF, all contribute to commission the development of architectural modelling, engineering modelling, 5D cost, the whole thing. Now there'll be lots of lessons learned, and that could be commissioned to start here next year, and that could be presented throughout the year 2019 as a potential platform that we could work from. I really think that's needed because, you know, we're waiting for the roadmap to be full funded. Let's see what happens. It may be funded later in the year, next year. But why don't we just sort of start from a point where we need, and this could be an exemplar project for Ireland. You know, say it's a school, call it what you will, but we need to actually start constructing the design information in the correct way, and so on. I think a lot of lessons could be learned from that, including the QSs.
Well, I think it's hugely important, and I think we can't wait. It's the problem that we can't wait for the digital roadmap to be funded, because the problem that we have now in the digital environment, 2 years is a lifetime. You know, and I think we can't wait for something to happen in 2 years, only to start the process now. The problem that is the problem that I see, and again, they said that the idea was to be honest here and for me to see, to demonstrate the issues that I'm seeing. One of the problems that I've seen is that in the absence of formal rules or guidelines or processes, individual companies and individual professions are doing their own thing. And they're going to become embedded as the de facto how things happen. And we will have to undo those in order to get back. And I think we have an opportunity now, before things get too embedded down, to actually set out real agreed rules and procedures across all the professions. That listen, this is at the minimum, this is what everybody does. These are the rules.
I mean, you're probably working on one of the most complicated projects in the country, the National Children's Hospital. I'm not talking about that level of detail.
No, it doesn't.
You know, it doesn't need to be that level of detail. It just needs to be something that you could demonstrate to the industry, with the best people involved, how you should go about putting the project together.
Yeah, but
templates right through, level details.
But if you take the Children's Hospital, it is complex and it's about scale. but if the procedures and processes were in place, they can scale up or scale down. They shouldn't only apply to this type of project or that type of project. I think we need to set a common rules that can be scaled up or scaled down depending.
To do it by building a project.
Yeah.
And that's
And that's missing at the moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So Gary, thank you very much for that presentation. You certainly touched on a lot of aspects that have been covered within the roadmap, and obviously, as Alan has alluded to, there is still the difficulty in relation to the fact that the roadmap hasn't been funded, but that's not to say that we, as you said, can't be moving ahead. We're trying to put in place standards, trying to look at, you know, achieving the targets that are within that. So certainly, I think you've given us plenty of food for thought there, and I suppose the outlined, you know, risks, opportunities, and rewards in all of those. I'm going to try and be very quick here and get us back on time schedule in relation to the next section we're going to cover. So, right now, what I'm going to talk about is the within SCSI, we have an interprofessional working group. Gary is on it, as well as a number of Mark Green who's in the room, and I'm possibly missing somebody else who I can't see from here at this point. But basically, within the Irish Institution of, or sorry, I apologise, within the Society of Chartered Surveyors, what we have done is we have brought together 7 of the 12 professional groups who are involved or can have roles within the BIM space. And there's an open opportunity for others of the professional groups to join in as well. And what we wanted to do is to try and see, okay, as a professional body, with the idea of how can we lead in relation to BIM and how can we equip our members to be able to take advantage of the opportunity of BIM, but also to make sure that they themselves are aware of any risks that they are exposed to within it. We have had some, I suppose, an initial phase of, as you would have in any normal team, we've had our storming and our learning phase, where we have been trying to initially just look at what are the goals of those different professional groups in the BIM space. We have some groups, as Gary has shown, some of our quantity surveyors are way ahead in terms of what they're doing in relation to BIM, whereas there are other much smaller QS practices and practices who specialise in different areas, who maybe haven't got anywhere as far along in terms of the BIM journey. How do we support both of those ends within that professional group? Similarly, on the geomatics space, for instance, we have groups like Murphy Surveys who are taking a leading position, partly because of the upskilling they have to do in relation to working in the UK, but also because they themselves have gone on their digital journey. But yet there are a lot of other companies who maybe aren't anywhere nearly as far. We've had some particularly interesting discussions with the valuation groups and the groups in the property and facilities manager. The comment that Gary was making about where is the value, what they are saying is that clients are not willing to make payments around BIM. They can't see what the value proposition is for them. And also financiers who are actually putting up the money for these projects, until we can articulate to them what the value is for them individually, they're not yet necessarily willing to involve in that. So the question is, how do we, as a professional body, help our members to help the clients that we have, and therefore make better outcomes for everybody? So what have we done to date? Obviously we now know that the GCCs have changed, and they have included the roadmap for what the mandate is going to be, and there was a consultation phase on that. So we in the SCSI, we put in response to that, as did a number of other groups within the room here, and that enabled us to also, I suppose, examine our own internal positions before we actually put in for that consultation. We also have been looking to feed into the CIC in relation to the update of the digital plan of works. So at the moment, the standard digital plan of works has a certain number of different professions identified within it, and what duties and what responsibilities each of those different roles have during the different stages of a project. But what we found when we looked at that from a Society of Chartered Surveyors point of view is that a lot of the roles that our members could and should play in order to actually be of benefit to overall projects, they were not being included. So we have added, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read that, it's just to give you an example of the level of information or the level of input that we think that different of the surveyors can actually have along all of the stages of the digital plan of works. So we're feeding this into the CIC, and the idea that Alan had there of this exemplar project that comes under the heading of the CIC, this would feed into it as well, where it could validate this suggestion that we have around the different roles and responsibilities. We've also, for each of the individual professional groups, we've undertaken a gap analysis as to where we currently are in our groups, where our members are, around their knowledge of BIM or their ability to engage in BIM processes and BIM collaboration. Where do we want to be, and how do we get there in terms of the resources that we need, in terms of the upskilling, those certain elements. So we've pulled all of this together from each of the individual groups to try and see what our common areas are and what our specific needs for the individual groups are, to produce an action plan. And this is what we're working our way through at the moment. And it is challenging for us to get to this because basically all of our volunteer members, like in the rest of the industry, are gone very, very busy. So trying to actually move this forward is something that we want to be moving more quickly than we're able to do, but this is the goal we have in mind. So member upskilling. We know that there are a lot of our members who are at very different stages along their own personal BIM maturity journeys. And we need to help those members, starting from baby steps right the way up to the bigger picture, and being able to get involved in the larger commercial projects, being able to grasp the opportunity that BIM has for us. To do that, we know that one of the things that we need to do is to produce for our internal members professional guidance notes, so that there are standard ways of working. Again, Gary referred to it, this idea that before we become embedded and entrenched in having bad ways of doing things, that we try and take a bigger picture view and a more connected view as to how we can actually work so that we are all delivering at the same standards. We then need to work on our external promotion. So in other words, making other professions within design teams, within construction, but also further out into the FM and commercial spaces, aware of what it is that we do and what value we can bring. So that conversation that Gary mentioned of him having around facade engineering, making people aware of what the value of those conversations are. I had a conversation last night with some of the students we have on our BIM masters, saying about how they engage with surveyors, geosurveyors in this case. And so rather than saying to the geosurveyor, can you give me a set of 2D plans? Why don't you say to the surveyor instead, this is the project that I'm involved with, this is the sort of work I'm going to do. Can you advise me as to what the best way of collecting spatial data for this is so that we can maximize the benefit of it? And it's those conversations where you allow each of the professions to actually bring their expertise and share it in a way that's of benefit to everybody. So to execute this, what we'll be looking at producing client guides from different surveying groups to the other different professions. We want to look at standardising templates for pre- and post-contract PEPs, so for your BIM execution plans, and also looking at standardised support documentation for tenders. Because again, at the moment, there is a shortage of knowledge here, very alluded to the fact that you often have, design teams creating the PEPs, which is not exactly necessarily the best for the outcome of the overall project. So we want to be able to feed into this, and that's what we're looking to do. And then there's also, I suppose, in relation to the leadership point, what we would like to have is to be, I suppose, stepping up and making our presence felt as the Society of Chartered Surveyors. Perhaps when the National BIM Council gets moving again, having a seat at that table. Last time round, there wasn't a survey voice on it, and I think that there is a lot of value that surveyors could bring to that one. And similarly, to continue to engage with the CIC around the digital plan of works and other activities that they're involved with, but also to continue to work with the OGP and government offices around the GCCs and other elements of that time. So that's just, I suppose, a quick snapshot of where we are in terms of the interprofessional group and what it is that we want to bring forward in terms of suggestions. Okay? So I'm going to jump, so we will have a panel discussion later on, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we might have about that. I'm going to use this opportunity as well, just to, Alan has kindly allowed us to mention to you as well the BIM Cert project, which CitA are involved with, also ourselves in TIT, and Future Analytics Consulting. The comment was made earlier about trying to get value out of BIM. One of the value pieces from BIM is full life cycle BIM. The element of being able to look at a project not just as being the design portion or the construction portion, but the full life cycle. And in relation to that, the EU has been very strong on the need for BIM to be an enabler of achieving energy targets as required under the EU Energy Directive. So what this BIM Cert project is specifically about trying to link BIM and the energy targets of the EU. So it's funded under the Horizon 2020 project. We have a number of partners in the project. It's led by Belfast Metropolitan College, and we've got Paul McCormack at the back of the room there. He's project managing and keeping us all in line very nicely. We have Future Analytics Consulting, also here in Dublin, as well as DLIT. We've got partners in Portugal and Lisbon, in Croatia, in Macedonia, and also Construction Industry Training Board of Northern Ireland. The challenge that we are specifically addressing is the fact that blue-collar workers are quite often, they're time-bound. So we have a lot of skilled workers on sites, but we're not getting them upskilled into the BIM area. And part of it is because they're so busy on site, nobody wants to take time and say, let's bring them off site and train them for a while, and then bring them back on again, because everybody's losing money while they're off site. They have practical skills, but they cannot necessarily access training. So there's money available to train them, but we can't afford the time to actually get them out off site to be able to do it. And if they're not upskilling, there's an impact for them individually, but there's also impacts for their employers, and there's impacts for the sector overall. It's great for us in design teams to be creating models and doing simulations and guaranteeing that we're reaching energy targets in the digital twin. But what happens if you then go out on site and the materials that are supposed to enable you to insulate your building in a particular way or get particular types of performance are incorrectly installed, or people make bad decisions on the site? If that's happening, the value of all that work that was done in design is actually going to be lost. So this is about getting the people who are on site executing the construction that we have designed to understand why certain design decisions have been made and how it is that they need to actually utilize particular materials or particular systems or ways of building. So with BIM Cert, what we are trying to do is to set up a large-scale training and qualification scheme for the entire construction supply chain. It will enable collaborative working and to improve access to and transition from design to development to delivery in relation to near zero energy targets. It's about achieving efficiency in relation to energy and fabric, and it's about utilising BIM and virtual construction as the tool to enable us to do this. We have a group of the consortium of partners who I've mentioned. We have an advisory, a technical advisory panel, which includes CitA, BRE, the sitting guilds, and a number of others, and we also then have external partners along the supply chain who are assisting us in terms of testing, in terms of analysing the methods that we're looking at to make sure that they are actually workable with different groups of workers. The BIM cert audience, this is targeted at blue-collar workers, but it also looks at the broader piece as well. So everyone from on-site workers, but also site managers, and then moving into the design team so that they understand that collaboration, that vertical collaboration that is needed. We're creating a beyond blended solution, which is a mix of e-learning, classroom sessions, self-directed study, social learning. Just-in-time learning is a really, really important factor of this to counter the fact that we can't take people off-site. How do we make sure that they're getting the information that they need at exactly the time that they need it? So it's a combination of face-to-face and digital, and being able to get the synergies and the maximum benefits that's coming from between the two of those. So starting point is a BIM readiness assessment, then moving into enabling people to understand the BIM basics that are relevant to them. So it's not important, going to be important for us to be teaching people who, let's say, are carpenters on site, what is going on in terms of simulation about steel or whatever it happens to be. It's the elements that are relevant to them. So that's the assessment tool will enable you to stream your learning in relation to what your knowledge needs actually are. And then you can see it's moving from the BIM basics into modelling, digital skills, information management, and then to the higher level targets, the ones around energy, the ones around achieving upskilling for the entire supply chain, improved quantification, improved lifecycle management. So that's the upscale that we're actually looking at. We are about halfway through the project at the moment. We have had a number of workshops with industry, but we are looking for more partners to be able to help us with testing, the rollout of the methods and the training tools that we are creating, because eventually this will become a set of training materials which will be very accessible to anyone to use within their organisation, because it's part-funded, or it's because it's funded under EU rules. This involvement in the testing at the moment is free. Afterwards, there will be some cost that will be associated with it, but if you get in when it's early, you're helping us and we'll be able to help you as well. So there's our contact details, and we'll be delighted if anybody would like to help out with it. Okay? So thank you very much. Okay, I'll now go back to chairing role, and I will be delighted to invite to the stage Andrew Croft, who is a senior associate with Beale and Company, and his presentation is going to focus on BIM, legal implications, and the contractual approach.
Right, so thanks a lot, everybody, for coming on this morning, getting up so early. It was quite cold outside. And thanks a lot for the invite to speak tonight from CitA and the SCSI. I am a senior associate at Beale & Company. Obviously, we've got offices in London, Bristol, Dublin, and Dubai. I'm based in London, but I spend quite a lot of time supporting the Dublin office. I guess that the main reason I'm here is because I am what you might call Beale & Company's BIM guru, just because I've been spending quite a bit of the last 6 or 7 years considering some of the legal implications of BIM and trying to work out ways of reflecting that contractually. Initially, I got involved back in 2012-ish, I think, in drafting the CIC protocol for the UK government task group, essentially, as part of the original BIM mandate over in the UK. Obviously, it's a really exciting time for BIM over in Ireland as well, with the digital roadmap. In my view, this is a real opportunity to try and shape and model how we want the industry over here to be approaching BIM, and to maybe try and learn from the lessons that have come out of the UK approach, for example. So I'm going to have a look at some of the key risks of BIM from my perspective. I should say, I'm a contracts lawyer, so I'm focusing on those risks and also how you could address a lot of those risks in the contract. Those risks range from, in my view, what does BIM mean on any one project, or what does it mean generally? The various ambiguity that could arise from the use of BIM in terms of what the deliverables are, and the use of common data environment to share information. Where we sit in terms of intellectual property and BIM, the potential software issues that could arise from the use of BIM, and in particular interoperability, which is not so easy for me to say, but we'll come on to that later. The importance of confidentiality and security, which is something that's quite easy to forget when you're using BIM and you're exchanging a lot more information than you might have done otherwise. And just, I guess, the general comment that the general consideration of trying to avoid inconsistency between a contractual approach and the actual approach that's taken on the project team. And I guess that's probably going to be a theme of my talk today, is trying to get somewhere where the contracts and the procurement documents are joined up with what the approach is in relation to BIM. And it's something that I see far too often, that I'll be sent an EIRs or a BEP and saying, this says that we're using the CIC protocol, or this says that the models are deliverables, and then I'll also look at the contract and there'll be nothing about BIM. So it's almost there's an intent from the project team to try and use BIM, but there's no real teeth to it. And it's a really important point. If we're going to get the most out of BIM, it needs to be something that is a requirement. So it's something that Gary mentioned a few times in his talk. But BIM is unfortunately not something that you can really just buy off the shelf, although a lot of clients will try and do that. If you want BIM, you need to say what it is you actually want, i.e. what the outputs are that you want from the use of BIM. It's very common that tender documents will just say you will deliver BIM, you will deliver level 2 BIM. Even level 2 BIM, it's not a defined legal phrase. There was a bit of a debate on Twitter over the last few days about what level 2 BIM meant and whether it meant that you had to provide COBE data or not. And there are so many different opinions. It was ridiculous. The point is, if a client wants BIM to be used and wants that to be a benefit after the project is finished, the client needs to say exactly what they mean by that. What are they expecting the project team to do? What deliverables are they requiring? And as Gary was mentioning, what exactly are the client's employees' information requirements? It's a bit of an unfortunate position, really, because from my perspective, BIM seems to be driven by the consultants and the contractors and the suppliers side, whereas for BIM to really work, you need the clients to be driving it and specifying what they want and telling people what they want to get out of it. I think, as Gary mentioned, there's definitely a niche there for consultants and contractors who are prepared to tell the clients this is what we think you need at the start of the project, and try and get them up to speed and almost design the employee's information requirements for them. But that's an important part of the process. And the problem is, or the risk is, if you don't, if you don't make that clear at the outset and you just say, okay, we'll deliver BIM, at the end of the project, the client might say, oh, actually, I didn't want BIM, I want like that. I did want Kobe deliverables. I did want you to send me the 3D models, which is when that wasn't something you're expecting. So it's just something that's really important to try and define as much as you can. The other key aspect in relation to BIM is having clear lines of responsibility. And that is really because BIM involves much more wider exchange of information, a lot more sharing of information, and often you may have two people working on the same model. Because of the fact that information is more widely shared and more readily accessible, it's important to try and agree who is doing what at the start of a project, as it is on any project, but it really is emphasised by the use of BIM. An example of that is the appendices to the CIC protocol, i.e. essentially a design responsibility matrix saying who is responsible for which elements of the model, when they're expected to be sharing certain elements, for example. The other aspect of responsibility and the sharing of information is the role that the common data environment plays on any project. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, essentially the common data environment is where the information is being shared, or the vehicle is used to share information. And there are various states of information in the common data environment: work in progress, shared, published, and archived. That might be fine as a working method, but quite commonly that process is in place, and then a client will say, oh, I want to look at all your work in progress and take that away and see what you're getting up to. And that may not be something, that's obviously not something that would have been anticipated at the start of my project, and that work in progress may not have been, for example, quality checked as much as the shared or published information. So it's important to clarify at the outset of a project where BIM is used, what the role of each of those different parts of the common data environment is, what the access to that information is going to be, and how models in the common data environment can be used. And typically, that's done by using status codes, for example, which say this information can be used for this particular purpose, and also being clear to what extent any particular model or information has been developed when it's shared, by using, for example, levels of definition or level of detail to be clear that this information has only been developed to level of detail 3, so it should only be used on that basis, for example. It's just really important that you are clear as how this is going to work at the outset of the project, and the processes are in place, so that the whole project team is working on the same basis. The other key area in relation to the common data environment is really having a good understanding at the outset as to who is responsible for the common data environment, essentially. And I guess this is really where the one reported case in relation to BIM came about, Trant and Mott MacDonald. Essentially, Mott MacDonald hadn't been paid, and so decided they wanted to walk away from the project. And when they did that, they took the access code essentially to the common data environment and said, no, Trant, we're not letting you get any of the information anymore. Essentially, the court held that Mott MacDonald couldn't do that, and they had to give the access to Trant, essentially. But I guess that one of the main points to come out of that case is that the dispute really arose because there had been no formal appointment of Montgomery, there had been a bit of an exchange of fee proposals. And they hadn't really agreed at the outset a clear process for who was going to be responsible for the accommodation environment, when this access code could be, or had to be held who held the access code essentially. And it just underlines from an employer perspective that they need to be the one holding that access code as much as possible. So, intellectual property, a common point or query that's raised in relation to BIM, and it was something that was mentioned earlier, is who owns the model. And it's really important to be clear on that at the outset of any BIM project. From my perspective, the approach to intellectual property ownership when you're using BIM shouldn't change much from any typical project. You should still be able to operate whereby the project team license the use of their information to a client to use it for specific purposes. But it's just important that those licenses do clearly include all BIM information, so that there's no gap between what is being licensed and what is being shared. And if a client does particularly want to take ownership of that information, that's obviously something that needs to be reflected in the contract. And the project team needs to be prepared to accept that position, i.e. if they assign ownership of all their intellectual property, including in their BIM information, that they're essentially handing over the right to reuse that information, and they could be losing a lot of value in doing so. Another key area in relation to intellectual property and BIM, which I mentioned earlier, is being really clear what the purpose for which any models and BIM information can be used. And I mentioned previously that BIM information will typically include status codes, levels of definition, and it's trying to be clear that the purpose for which that information can be used is tied into those status codes and those levels of definition. And that's the approach that's taken in the current CIC protocol. Otherwise, the standard approach might be our information can be used for any purpose for which it was prepared, which is fairly vague and open-ended. So I guess the main point in relation to how BIM impacts the intellectual property is just having as much clarity as you can as to what purpose information is being shared for at any time. Another interesting point, or relevant point in relation to BIM, is the basis on which members of the project team are able to use each other's information, i.e. if the architect needs to access the engineer's model, do they have a right to do that? Or is there a risk that they might be breaching the engineer's intellectual property? It's something that's not usually clearly catered for in contract documents, but I think it is something that's important when BIM is used. Generally, the reason why it's not catered for is because there would be almost an implied license between the project team to use each other's information. But I think because of the increased information exchange when BIM is used, it's something that is important to think about. And in the CIC protocol, for example, there are licenses granted from the employer to the project team to use all the other information, all the other project team members' information for the specified purpose. And that's just to create a really clear framework setting out how information can be used. Another implication or key legal risk arising from the use of BIM is really the role that the software plays in terms of any additional risk. Obviously, BIM is more than just software. It's about process and about the culture on a project. but software does play a key part of producing the outputs. A common anecdote that I heard in relation to BIM and the risk of software use is that when, for example, the engineer shares information in one particular format and then sends that over to the architect for use in a different format, that there will need to be some form of conversion from the architect format to the engineered format so that they can both speak to each other, just because for historical reasons, I think different members of the project team typically use different softwares, and those software, that software doesn't always speak the same language. And because of that need to transfer the information, there is a risk of the information changing or the data becoming corrupted as you transfer it from one format to another. I mean, as I said, the anecdote I heard was that after that transfer, all of a sudden a beam that was meant to be in the roof was suddenly focused on the floor and angled downwards, which was an obvious error and could be picked up. It's something that just needs to be thought about carefully at the start of any project. And essentially, procedures need to be in place to try and avoid these sorts of risks arising. I think an approach they took on the Crossroad project was to say, to avoid this, we're going to say everybody has to use exactly the same software format and exactly the same version of that software format. I think that's perhaps a bit extreme. There are other ways of trying to avoid this risk. Things like Open BIM, IFC formats, so that you're sharing information in a format that is not vendor specific, that anybody can access it, and it should reduce these risks. And that's really why these processes need to be in place. And the other point is that generally these software companies are fairly large firms, often US firms, and they have very wide exclusions of liability in their terms, and there's very limited scope to negotiate those terms. So if an issue arose that was solely due to the software being used, it's unlikely that the architect or engineer would have any right recourse against their software company. So it's an important point to bear in mind. Are you prepared to take that risk, or do you want to exclude liability for those sorts of issues in your contract? It's something that is addressed in the CIC protocol. Essentially, each project team member excludes liability for data corruption, and essentially anything that happens after they issue the information, so that they're not taking that risk. Security and confidentiality is another important area, and potential legal risk arising from the use of BIM. As I said, BIM involves increasingly, or the increased exchange of information. And I mean, from demonstrations I've seen, the amount of information that a BIM model will contain is quite bewildering when you look at how easily they can drill into the models and all the different aspects of it. I guess the point is just to make sure that that there are processes in place so that if you copy something from the BIM model on one project into a BIM model on a different project, that by doing that you're not disclosing or you're not sharing confidential information in relation to the original project or the original client. And that the only thing you've got in that BIM model is what you actually need on that particular project. And similarly, because of the increased exchange of information on any BIM project, it means that there's increased access and an increased risk of that information getting into the wrong hands. An example that I've heard would be, I think, possibly there are some Chinese contractors up there, or Chinese contractors that will tender for work just so they can essentially access the intellectual property in a design, and even if they're awarded it, they won't actually be there to do any work. It's just a way of them trying to obtain intellectual property and access to information which they shouldn't really have had access to. So essentially, it's something that there is one of the PAS documents, PAS 11925, particularly focuses on security, and it's something that is really important to have in the back of your mind on any BIM project, so that you've got some procedures in place to address these risks, and also that the project team is required to actually take those into account during the project. I guess the other risk in terms of data loss and security is also an understanding in terms of your organisation where you sit. If, because of the way you've accessed information, there's a big hack in relation to a particular project, or a big cyber risk, which, for example, causes the whole model or the whole organization environment to crash or disappear, would that sort of liability be covered by professional indemnity insurance? And also, do you have cyber insurance in particular, which is particularly aimed at that sort of risk? If you're not clear on the insurance position, you really need to make sure that there are processes in place on any project so that if that sort of hack occurs or that sort of issue on the accommodation environment happens, that everybody's got backups and that you're not just dependent on one copy of all the information. So, how is BIM typically reflected contractually? As with tenders, unfortunately, it's not normally reflected particularly clearly as a matter of course. And the main bugbear is that the position in the contract is often not consistent with the actual BIM processes that are in place, i.e. the deliverables won't be consistent with what the project teams agree to provide, which could mean that the agreements the project teams are making have limited teeth. Earlier this year, the Winfield report was published, which essentially outlined that there is a real gap, I think, in terms of the contractual approach to BIM, and probably generally lawyers' understanding of BIM and how they reflect that in contracts. Just a key area would be that there are various different understandings of what BIM meant, and I think a lot of lawyers were not really clear what they needed to do to actually reflect BIM in a contract. Just because I think there was a bit of a perception amongst a lot of lawyers that BIM was just a software, so it's not something that they really needed to think about too deeply. Obviously, the risk is if you don't properly reflect BIM in a contract, there'll be ambiguity or inconsistency between what the client's expecting and what the project team's required to provide, which is more likely to give rise to a dispute. And it also could mean that the client doesn't obtain the true benefit of BIM. And I guess just as another note, it's not something that I've seen mentioned in Irish contracts that I reviewed. It seems to be something that needs to grow up here as much as it does in the UK. I'm trying to get the legal industry understanding how they should be reflected contractually and what they need to do about it. So, what is a typical approach that you can take to reduce some of those risks? Obviously, as I said, making sure that intellectual property rights cover models is an important point, but that's just one element of it. You need to do more than that. You also need to be clear that the scope is consistent, that all the risks that that I mentioned previously are covered in terms of risk of software issues, and also try and have a contract that encourages, or at least takes into account, the fact that this isn't if BIM is used, there's going to be an increased amount of cooperation and collaboration between the project teams. So trying to have some kind of process for resolving any issues if they arise during a project, or if any ambiguity arises, and trying to encourage the project team members to actually collaborate on a regular basis. Those are all things that are included in the CIC protocol, the second edition of which was published earlier this year. The CIC protocol is something that can be easily incorporated into any contract, and it is intended to be incorporated into every contract on a project, of the whole project team. It basically, on the most part, just piggybacks onto the underlying agreement by adding in provisions in relation to BIM and obligations in relation to BIM. It's a document that's available online, and there's a link on there. Or if you just Google for it, you can easily find it. But just using the CIT protocol itself, it will only address the legal side of things. As I said, for BIM to be properly addressed contractually, it needs a joined up approach. And the CIT protocol includes two appendices, three appendices actually in the updated version. The responsibility matrix, essentially the information particulars and the security requirements. Unfortunately, it's quite common that I'll see a protocol included in the contract, but none of those appendices will have been completed, which essentially means that there's no real teeth to what the parties have signed up for. So it really needs to be a collaborative approach between the lawyers and the project team to make sure you have been properly reflected in a contract. Obviously, with the BIM roadmap recently announced, it's a very exciting time in Ireland in relation to use of BIM. And as I said at the start, I think this is an opportunity now to try and drive good practice in terms of how BIM is reflected in procurement and how BIM is reflected contractually. Just essentially to reduce any ambiguity that might arise and to try and make sure that clients are obtaining the benefit that they want from BIM. So I'll be really interested to see how that progresses over the next few years. I think we're having a Q&A session straight away now, so
at the end.
Over the end. Okay, yeah, there's one more speaker, but if anyone's got a burning question now.
Can we just hold the questions over to the panel?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. So there will be an opportunity at the end for questions for any of the speakers. Okay. So our final speaker of this morning's session is Philip Kelly from Coordinate Survey. He's going to talk on the connection between BIM and geospatial data. Thanks.
Okay, I'd first like to thank CitA very much for inviting me to speak here on behalf of Coordinate Survey Ireland. As Arvel said, my name is Philip Kelly and I'm a member of the IT department in the Ordnance Survey of Ireland. Specifically, that's a very vague term, the IT department, but specifically I work with the Oracle databases and on the Oracle database team. And we are a geospatial house. In Ordnance Survey Ireland, it's the only show on the road. We are geospatial. So, moving on. Why am I here today at CitA to speak? Because OSI, as a public stakeholder, can extend the CitA message of connecting up the whole life cycle of planning, building, control, design, build, health and safety, and operations leading to smart cities. Basically, we believe we can contribute to the process that CitA is trying to implement. So this is a very important point. I kind of touched on some things that Gary mentioned in his speech earlier. In January 2017, the National Mapping Agreement was signed, and if you're not aware of it, it's an agreement that gives government departments and public sector bodies unrestricted access to most of OSI's geospatial data. So, what we try to do in OSI is become innovators in national mapping. So, we focus on providing users with the most up-to-date mapping services, making data easier to access, use, and integrate, adding value to our users' work processes, and optimizing operational efficiencies with best practice and technologies. So, we like to see ourselves as thought leaders in the geospatial industry and as innovators. So, just to emphasize that this is a technical presentation, and it's going to be talking about our OSI data model, Prime 2, which is an object-oriented geospatial data model. And then I'm going to introduce a concept called linked data. Maybe some people have heard of it, maybe you've never heard of it. And then I'm going to introduce some research that's been done on linked data integrating with BIM. And then right at the end, I'm just going to briefly mention that going forward, some collaboration would probably be a very good idea. So, like in previous slides, it's always good to go back and understand the past and how OSI has developed over the years. Like, it's 200 years old in mapping technologies, and how the maps have been created over the years and the data gathered has changed unrecognizable. And when we come back in 100 years' time, or not when we come back, but in 100 years' time, it will be completely unrecognizable again. And that's the whole point of today. Things in technology are changing so fast that it's like Gary was saying about the implications on the law side, and Andrew was saying, sorry, on the law side, and you know, what implications there are. Technology is moving so fast that we are actually struggling to keep up with the implication of that. So, you'll see here, lithographic stones, how they first captured maps in the Ordnance Survey, and that moved on to copper plate printing. These now become artifacts, but at the time they were the technological leaders in capturing mapping data. And then things slowed down for a good bit until the 60s arrived, and then photogrammetry process arrived along with analog, and then the first computerization arrived in the 70s. And then flying activities began in 1979, and then some analytics and GPS then in 1989. And then surprisingly, in 1992, desktops arrived with digital input, and then film scanning, and then our field computers arrived in 1998 and 2004, and then in 2004 as well, in 2005 we started capturing LiDAR data and digital sensor data. And this is a big point, the next point. So change. Well, change has happened in the Ordnance Survey, and it's happened massively. From changing 14,000 cartographic map sheets to maintaining 50 million real-world objects, which is our Prime 2 data model. And that is the change that has happened in the last 5-6 years. It is a monumental change of how we capture data and how we maintain the life cycle of data. So, out with the old, in with the new. So how do things look now? Well, we're still flying, we're still doing field surveying. Photogrammetry is also part of the data capture process. But you see in the middle here, we now have all these common concepts in the geospatial world. Raster, vector, cartographic displacement, topological consistency, geometry specification, ortho imagery, city and landscape modeling, and you'll see in the inner ring, we have all these other new concepts. GUIDs, I'll explain that in a minute. Data rules, change intelligence, geodetic framework, history of data, and conflict management. And all this is happening invisible to the customer. They just want to see it as a REST service or an API served up to them in some sort of web browser so they can access it or take it into their systems. Create, maintain, provide. Okay, so the two things I'm going to focus on next are linked data, which is the next step, and how that's being served up for our boundary and building data on GeoHive. So, Prime 2 is, as I said before, is our object-oriented geospatial data model. OSI developed a spatial data storage model known as Prime 2, which is an object-oriented model implemented using the Oracle Spatial and Graph database technology. And you'll see there, these are two Oracle engineered systems called Exadata. One's the X4, one's the X5. All our data is stored on these supercomputers. In here, we have all our databases on the X4, and in here, we have all our databases on the X5. So it's a resilient failover system. And that's where the data is coming from. We're a massive Oracle spatial house. So the three key phases of that project were, in 2007, 2010, we did the data modeling, where we took our old 2D vector data and tried to understand how it's going to work in a more complicated and intricate model. And then we spent 2 years data re-engineering that, getting the old data into the new data model, and then 1 year for implementing systems and infrastructure for managing that data. And today, we have our over 50 million uniquely referenced features, single source of truth. That's important, and it links in what guys were saying previously in the other talks. Where how do you know what happens to objects, and can you stand over the history of it? And what was it like 2 years ago? What was it like 10 years ago? It's scale independent. That's another important point. As I said, it maintains the object's life cycle. It's a real-world data model. Non-proprietary. That's important as well. Based on industry standards. Sorry, I'm just checking the time to make sure I'm moving along. Okay. So the data has, and this is important for the BIM process. I'm trying to emphasize what you guys can get out of it. It has over 3.5 million building objects. So it has the footprint of the building. And each building has a form and function. I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. And then the life cycle change of the building is also in the model. So is it in use? Derelict? Examples like that. And this is another really important point. It is got persistent IDs in the form of GUIDs. Global Unique Identifiers. So every object in Prime 2 has a GUID. So other systems can talk to that GUID. Okay? That's what I mean by object-oriented. So the form and function is very applicable as well, because every feature has a form and a function, which means a physical form of an object as it exists in the real world. School, pylon, field, river, lake. And then the function is the use or purpose of an object in the real world, i.e. residential, army barracks, electricity supply, agricultural reservoir, hospitals, etc. And building data rollout plan for our linked data project has prioritized the formal functions based on the count of the performance of the function. So you'll see up there at the top over nearly 2 million building generated residents in Ireland. And it goes on school, primary, end-of-terrace residence, apartment building, school, secondary. So all that's stored inside the model. So how is this managed? How do we manage to maintain the integrity of the data? Well, we implemented a geospatial management system which looks after the quality of the data. So by that I mean when the surveyor goes out and surveys a building and he uploads it back into our system, it's validated. It's validated by 500 different rules, twice, to make sure the integrity of the data is maintained. Validation. And I'm just going to throw up this architectural swim lane diagram of the system. Sorry about this. Apart from this part over here, there's really not a whole lot you have to worry about. But that's it. Validation. So the surveyor hits upload and 500 rules check every geometry he has changed or she has changed. And if it passes, happy days, back into the database. If it fails, back down to the surveyor, and it has to be fixed up. Also, it'll check for conflict. Not that important really here, but from a surveying point of view, it's very important because what if two surveyors are editing the same feature? They go to upload it, one has to be right and the other has to be wrong. Or maybe it can be automatically solved, automatic conflict resolution, who knows. So the point is, guys, this is the big point here. Lots of big points in this presentation. This data meets some basic requirements for BIM. For example, how to handle multiple building representations, geometries, and how to combine this with authoritative geospatial datasets. Crucially, it provides a sound basis for authoritative building data in Ireland. That's an authoritative image. So that's the point, guys, about Prime 2, how it's being managed, where it's come from. Yeah, okay, that's all I'll say about that. So let's move on to another concept. So this is all merging in. So we have Prime 2, now we're going into linked data. And we're working currently with the Adapt Centre in Trinity and doing some research on supplying our building and boundary data as linked data, okay? So what that means is currently all our boundary data is being served up to the public as linked data. And we're in the process of giving out our buildings as linked data. So I'm just going to explain what all that means. So the goal is to develop a semantic architecture and linked data platform for the OSI, taking into account best practices and guidelines in the domain of geospatial information and OSI's current technology stack, which is Oracle Spatial and Graph on the Exadata platform. So I'm going to show you a slide now about linked data. And this slide represents a linked data project for open data on the web. And that's how complicated things can get, guys. And you think about a BIM model and the amount of data stored into it, and the amount of things that can link to it. And I'll just make a quick note about this in the middle. You probably can't see that too well, but that says DBPDF. And that's something I'm going to speak about in a little while, but that's also an important concept. But in computing, linked data is a method of publishing structured data so that it can be interlinked and become more useful through semantic queries. But rather than using them to serve web pages for human readers, it extends them to share information in a way that can be read automatically by computers. Here's a big change, guys. Linked data is an approach to expose, share, and connect related data which was not previously linked. If you take one point from this presentation, that's the point. Nobody knows the power of that. Linking data that's never been linked before. So, the 4 linked data principles are as follows. You use URIs to identify things. And then you use deference HTTP URIs so that people machines can look up those things. And when a person machine looks up a URI, provide useful RDF information. Include RDF statements that link related things, providing additional information. So there's a few new concepts there if you've never worked with linked data before. This thing of URIs and RDF information in the background. I'll just briefly explain this to you. So that's a URI, and that's coming specifically from our boundary data. It's being served up in data.geohive.ie, which is our web-based service for serving up data. It's a county boundary, and there's its GUID, its unique identifier. So other machines can read that and know exactly what it is. Same thing here, data.geohive.ie, building, it's one of our buildings, and there's its unique identifier. So what's happening is the geospatial data is being uplifted into RDF information. And this RDF information then can be put into our Oracle database, and that can be served up into the web as linked data. And other people can connect to it. And this is what RDF looks like. It's basically metadata on the linked URI you just saw there. So it's got, that's just the boundary, so you've got the polygon information for boundary, it's a multi-polygon, and then you've got other information, it's Dublin County, and then the ontology associated with it. Okay, let's move quickly on here. So if you just want to see this in simple terms of car models, guys, this is a car table. So just think of a URI as, let's say you had a car table of an ID, which is the GUID, Ford Focus 2005, make, model, year, subject, predicate, object. And then that simply can turn into your URI. Wherever you're serving it up from, it's a car, its description is make, and it is a Ford. And the other URI is model and year. And that can all be served up as linked data. This is our RDF for our published building data. Well, RDF is General Post Office, and we have the Irish version of it, significant fished, and then we have our lat and long coordinate of the building point. So, I'll just briefly mention DBpedia because it is an important part of the linked data process. So DBpedia is a project aiming to extract structured content from the information created in the Wikipedia project. So if you put up something that's relating to a structure or it's got lats and longs in the Wikipedia page, DBpedia allows users to semantically query relationships and properties of Wikipedia resources, including links to other related data sets. So how do we, that's just DBpedia, now we'll go on to GeoHive. GeoHive is our system for publishing and serving Ireland's authoritative boundary and building data sets as linked data on the web. It looks like this. So if you can go right now to data.geohive.ie and you will see our boundary data up there. Just go into here and you'll be able to download it or take the linked data information from it and query it as well if you want using GeoSparkle queries. This is what the linked data front end looks like. So it's got the form, function and geometry. And it's got a description of the Blackhall apartments in Dublin. That's just an example of the front end as well. Again, guys, this is all available on the web at the minute. Okay, and I'll just briefly show you a GeoSparkle front end as well. Again, you can query the data from the web. You just go in and you write this thing called Sparkle queries. I wouldn't worry too much about this, but if you are interested in that, it's a form of SQL, and it's just how you query linked data. So the architecture of the linked data platform is as follows. So we have the geospatial URI catalogs, which you saw there as the building. And then this is all coming from our Prime2 data model, and then it's turned into R2 or ML mappings, which goes into a triple store, which goes into a Spark endpoint, and eventually a linked data front end, which you can download data pumps from, or the ontologies that go straight out to the web browser or the application that is accessing the data. So, another important point is the provenancy and life cycle. Provenance and life cycle. So what that means is, are we keeping a history of what's happened to all the buildings down through the editing phase? So when was the building changed? And what changed? And who changed it? And this information is all being stored as well in the actual model. So this brings me on to linked data and BIM integration. So how is linked data, how is this building information going to link with BIM? Well, currently there's some very good research papers in conjunction with the ADAPT Research Centre, which is based in Trinity, and they've developed 2 papers, and I really would recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, is reading these 2 papers. And they're freely available on the web, and they were written by Chris McGlynn, Christophe Brune, Lorraine McNerney, and Declan O'Sullivan. And the first one is integrating building information models with authoritative Irish geospatial information. And they have come to some very significant conclusions in those papers. The second paper is on ResearchGate, and it's integrating Ireland's geospatial information to provide authoritative building information models. So, some conclusions from that research are as follows. The combination of linked data and BIM has the potential to meet the requirements for storing and sharing large amounts of data. Interlinking geospatial data as RDF and interlinking to a well-established BIM standard, IFC. So that was mentioned previously by Andrew as an open source BIM standard. And by combining OSI data and IFC, a much richer set of data becomes available for querying BIM. So the goal of the research is to develop a method for querying large data sets of BIM and BIM-related data based upon the authoritative geometries which are available through the OSI. Potentially, agreements could be developed between OSI and IFC model owners, whereby queries could return subsets of open data, along with licensing information for data, which is considered to have some commercial value. So, just to wrap things up, I suppose the next stage is, this is very much research and development, and collaboration needs to happen, and workshops and hackathons and all that sort of stuff. So if anybody has any ideas or wants to get in touch with Ordnance Survey, please feel free to contact us about any of the things that I've mentioned up here. And thank you very much for your time.
That was great. Thank you very much. So we're now at the panel discussion point, so I'm going to invite Andrew and Philip to come up to the podium here, and I'll go and sit beside them as well. And there'll be a couple of roving mics, so May has one here, so if anyone has any queries on any of the presentations or any, I suppose, more generic comments, please do feel free to ask. Ralph is always good for a first question, thank you.
But maybe it's a bit of a question and a comment to this morning's presentations. I chair a committee for the NSAI on BIM standards, and the role of the committee is to look at development of standards in Europe and sort of make comments, etc., and then try and feed that back into industry. One of the things is the surveying industry is not represented on that committee. There's nobody from geospatial, there's nobody from OSI, there's no quantity surveyors, so it's very important work, I think, that of coming together of the different professions and talking about data and how we exchange data between, and there was reference this morning from Gary about coding, that we don't have to invent this stuff. Like Uniclass coding has been developed, people just need to start using it, and and when it comes to mapping and planning, and unfortunately somebody from the Building Control Management Authority has joined that committee, so hopefully building control and planning is beginning to think about this, but it would be great if somebody from OSI, who are doing excellent work, also gets, because it's fascinating all the research work that's being done in Ireland. It's completely disconnected.
I suppose I'll just answer in, I suppose, indirectly, there is a link because we're feeding into the OpenGeo, the geo community would feed into Open Geospatial Consortium, which then links across to Building Smart, which obviously comes back into the NSI of AI in that particular way. Maybe
Yeah, I get your point totally, Ralph, that it can be quite disheartening when you see other people doing research and nobody else is that aware of it. But it is about collaboration and getting involved with each other, and say it again, hackathons and workshops and sitting on these boards. It's probably the hardest thing is finding resources in the organisation that have time to go spend on those boards and do the R&D. But OSI is very, very committed to linked data and is very committed to finding a way of linking that to BIM, as you can see by the research that's been carried out. So if you have any questions about it, or if we want to get closer together, just let us know, or we can sit down and have a chat about it.
Just on that, the Society does have a working group now. It's in its infancy because we've been, what you say, the people involved are busy, but it started off with a lecture I attended with a company called Enerfund, who has surveyed some 30,000 to 40,000 commercial buildings. Now, our interest is in having, I don't know if you're familiar with the NAV Direct search in the valuation office, in the rating office.
Not well. I should be, but I'm not.
But this, this actually feeds into exactly the point you're making. Is that we're working on the moment, so you can tap onto a property, and you can get information from the from the valuation office. This is all information which is freely available anyway. So we get the valuation information, you get the rating information, you get planning information, you get tenure, lease information from the PSRA database, as well as any transactions that have happened in relation to the leases. It goes into the BER, the fabric of the building, and your own information from the OSI. I mean, it's obviously our intention to be in touch with you at some stage.
Yeah.
But that is in train, and don't worry, we will be having meetings in relation to that, because that then solves our problem, and it's got the BIM information and the IPMS as well. Yep. So it's a one-stop. That's it. It's all available. And the question is, which platform do you put it on, though? Do you tie it to the OSI? Do you have an individual? Do you have its own source, or what?
Yeah, that's interesting. What identifier are you using, by the way, for the buildings? Are you creating your own identifier, or?
Well, this is the point. This is, this is the reason why we have to work with a group. I mean, at the moment, if you want information on building, you have to go into, say, for example, into the valuation office, the VALOF.
Yeah.
That's where you get it now. But that's just that. So, there needs to be an identifier that everyone can identify.
Yeah, and
say the OSI, for example.
The unique identifier that everybody uses. Yeah.
Exactly, that everybody knows about. I mean, within the profession, we could find, we could circulate it.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had a question for Philip. I think it's really interesting the way you guys are sort of pulling together lots of information and data on buildings. I think there's a big part also of what I'm work for John Paul's and sort of main contractor. You see lots of models that are developed for buildings around the country, and these models have lots of detail, lots of information, but they're siloed off. They go to where the client or only the people immediately involved in that project see or can utilise that information, even if it's from a sort of spatial awareness where you're working on a building in one position and there's all this really detailed model next door or adjacent, and you don't have any of that information or any visibility of it. So have you guys looked at any sort of where you can start sharing sort of even 3D geometry on the footprint of...
Yeah, look, we're, as I said before, we're a geospatial house, and I do understand a little bit about BIM, but I'm far from an expert. But I do know that people are not going to give up their BIM models too easily. Now, I could be completely wrong. Many people in the room know that better than me, but until that starts happening, I can't see that changing anytime soon, unless there is open standards like IFC, as we mentioned. Again, I'm not 100% sure about that.
I suppose, yeah, that's one thing I'd like to see.
Yeah, that's on your side, I think, is the question. Ralph,
I mean, there is technology now using stereophotography that can calculate.
Using it, they've been using it for a long time.
Yeah, so I mean, it's entirely possible with very cheap technology to create 3D models of our cities using clever stereophotography and maybe the footprint. I don't know, maybe a question is how accurate are the...
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood the question, sorry. I thought what you meant is people who are out there surveying and creating BIM models, are they going to give that data over to be linked to geospatial? Yeah.
Like you've got like the Google Maps style where you can actually get some 3D visualization, but we actually have a lot more detailed models that people... It is about people sharing that willingness.
Like the drainage and...
Having the intellectual property, having a better understanding of licensing, so maybe where there's a licensing framework where they go, actually we will share this really good information, and there's some sort of licensing agreement that can be put in place, then that might have a framework for people's willingness to give away their valuable information.
Yeah.
Just to say, there's a pan-European project going on called GeoBIM via EuroSTR, which is an organisation that links national mapping agencies across Europe with universities for research. And one of the things they're looking at exactly this problem here across Europe. We're not unique in this. Ordnance Survey hasn't solved it, but then nor have any of the others. And it comes back to what Andrew was referring to earlier about the intellectual property and the ownership of the models, and whether, I suppose, ideally, if we could get some sort of a thin BIM model that came out at the end of the process, which then was validated through a set of rules and then became part of the national mapping data, that would be a nice workflow to have. And I suppose we are looking at, on that project, we are looking at that across Europe to see how feasible it is. Probably technically it's feasible, it's more the contractual and legal.
Yeah, and I think until you've got that framework in place, I guess the practical point or step that you could take, which might be pretty obvious, would be if you know there's been some work carried out next door to your site, go and ask the neighbour, go and ask if they've got anything, and then I guess you probably have to come to a commercial agreement about, or I have to come to some kind of commercial agreement about whether they're paying to access that information. It would probably be information that's provided for information only, so there'd be limits on how much you can learn that. But I guess for that kind of real framework to be in place, so you could just go next door and get reliable information, either you need to every contract to say your information is going to be shared to everybody and you'll retain liability for that, or you would just need quite a lot of money to change hands. So it's, I think, to take on that risk.
I mean, ideally there would be a fully joined up system from planning right the way through to actually turning the data into the valuation office and property registration. So, you know, that isn't a goal, ultimately. It takes a few steps. There's a question from Shane?
Yeah, I have a question back here. Question to Andrew, actually. Firstly, a comment. Most of what I see going on is there's no certainty, or nobody has a mechanism of certainty of what was designed is what was built. And they're not building, and not putting that into the workflows across the board so that you can have absolute. Right now, we just rely on the opinion of people, mostly just engineers, and now we're seeing the cost of it. Multiple issues arrive out of that because there's no actual validation being done on sites. So that all those models that we have, who the hell knows if they were built or not to that spec. So that's just a comment there. My specific question, Andrew, is about design liability. Okay, I was surprised you didn't include design liability as one of the risks. So particularly where people are going off and specifying that everyone will share and work within the one model. And in those systems, typically, like most people, a lot of people using Revit, there's no tracking of who's doing what to where. Whereas in OpenBIM, when you have layered IFC for reference views, you can then use BCF and other mechanisms to track who's actually doing what and use that as a communication tool. And there is no Sperrins doctrine here. You know, there is cases where, you know, like Hedley Byrne, these guys, there is case where even if you rely on someone else's design and then you modify it, you know, that's going to just cause confusion because you're going to have to say, well, how can you prove that someone else modified a design that you gave to them? So particularly what happens here is the handoff from design teams to contractor teams. Contractors then modify further rather than necessarily keeping the base back document. And then where does the design liability lie? I think that's going to be an interesting case coming our way at some stage.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and it's sort of tied into where I was, what I was saying when I was talking about having clear lines of responsibility in terms of who's doing what at when, and when. But you're right, you can say at the outset, this is what everybody's going to do, this is who's responsible for what, but if, as a matter of fact, the engineer goes into the architect's model and starts playing around with it, by doing that, they will assume responsibility and will take on additional liability. And also, as you say, if a contractor takes the design team's model and then goes off and builds it, they will be assuming responsibility for that. So I guess it's really just something that promotes, I think it encourages, BIM encourages more collaborative, almost procurement methodologies where you have contractors involved at an earlier stage so that there's less division between different parts of the project. But it is just something that needs to be really thought about at the start of any project, and you may see contractors more and more saying we need to expressly state we're only liable for resource and care, we won't take fitness for purpose for these designs. And you probably, and I'm seeing this outside of BIM anyway, the design team's also saying that because they know that their models are going to may end up in hands of the contractor, so they only want to be responsible for the design that's carried out.
There's a follow-up to that, in that it's hypothetical, but if the owner turns around and says, I want everyone using the same thing, there is mechanisms available to the skilled professional to ensure that those demarcation lines are maintained, i.e. OpenBIM, IFC4 views. And if you decide not to use those, are you not ultimately, and you can't then say, oh, well, fitness or purpose, of course it was going to happen. You know?
Yes, yeah, and I think I would almost see the sort of type of the approach you were mentioning where it's almost a free-for-all, everybody can just play around with the model as and when. That would almost be something that in my head is beyond level 2, almost. I don't know what level 2 necessarily, if it has a clear, level 3 necessarily has a clear definition, but I would say that's outside of what is the current sort of standard approach to BIM. The key way of avoiding that risk is, as you say, just making sure there are those clear lines of demarcation so that you know what I've done, this is what the engineer's done. That there's a clear audit trail, so that if needed, your insurers can go through it at the end of a project and work out what you did. And I guess that always touches upon a whole new area, which I did mention in my talk. When the first real case comes up that involves BIM, in my view, there will be a real need for a BIM expert, someone just to almost translate all this information, or just get this information, drill down into it, and explain to the lawyers exactly what it means, and to any of the other advisors, because it is quite bewildering, and I think I can imagine it will be when you have the first case and just got all this information floating around.
We have time for maybe one more question for someone.
Sorry, we're building surveyors, and as part of our process we provide like a health and safety function, so PSDP, which would be CDM in the UK. Under that system there's already sort of a pre-acknowledgement for health and safety legislation for information to be shared and passed across in the terms of a safety file. And that's information that comes from all design parties, engineers, architects, whomever else, along with the contractor. There seems to be, certainly from my review today, an awful lot more scrutiny put on the modelling system versus the scrutiny that's put on a safety file. Because ultimately, are they the same thing? In that it is a document of information produced to allow you to see how you got through a design process, a construction process, and ultimately provide information on how to future-proof and maintain the property. I just find it interesting that one is going through a massive legal review in terms of intellectual property, how it's used and liability, where the other one hasn't really been given that credence in terms of review and assessment.
Yeah, so I mean, just so I'm clear, are you saying that the health and safety side doesn't have that kind of review?
It certainly doesn't seem to, in that, and maybe it just hasn't been viewed under such scrutiny, but there hasn't been a resistance from architects, engineers to pass across information for inclusion in a safety file. They don't seem to turn around and say this is for information only. Say here's my as-built drawings, put them in your safety file, here's the M&E information, put it in your safety file. And there doesn't seem to be a restriction around its use. You know, has that just not come about? Has it not been reviewed to that same detail? Like, I'm just sitting here and going, are we already doing this process? It's just not layered.
Yeah, I think it is partly perception, i.e. BIM is seen as involving a lot more information, a lot more sharing of information, whereas, for example, health and safety file, you just share, it's a really important part of it, but then you're just sharing your hard copy documents a lot of the time, or reports, and things like that for inclusion in a hard copy file that might get left in the basement. The BIM side, the BIM model, it's just a lot more fluid, I think, and there's a lot more potential for uncertainty. I think with a health and safety file, if the engineer sends over its contribution, it should be quite clear that that's what the engineer added into it. It's not anything else. Whereas with a BIM model, and everybody's working on a sort of an extranet, it's harder to control who's doing what and who owns what, than with that more sort of contained system, I guess, we have with health and safety. But I mean, BIM and health and safety is a whole issue in its own, and I think there's a lot of movement towards using BIM to produce a health and safety department as a way of addressing that risk.
It will come under further scrutiny.
I mean, that's just picking up on the point that Ralph mentioned, you know. I mean, if you take the roadmap as an example, and the very first pillar, the leadership pillar, you know, OSI, planning, building control, safety, all these people have to be at the table, NSAI, working together, because BIM is going to disrupt what we do in the future. So that's the whole idea, is that we've got to connect these things together. There's an awful lot of sort of individual initiatives in town planning, in building control, in construction design, OSI, but we're just not talking to each other. That's the big, big problem. And that's why it's taken a little bit longer, I believe, to get this implemented, because the right people have to be at the table to get this to work. very strong.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap up the panel discussion there. Can I ask you to thank the other panel? We give the floor to Alan.
Thanks very much.
Who's going to wrap up.
Thanks very much. Good morning, I would just like to say thank you to all our speakers this morning, to Des and Amber and Gary and Andrew and Philip. Fantastic, really interesting presentation. Very, very important that NSAI form part of that conversation. I just want to say a few thank yous to our sponsors this year, many of whom you've met during the year, many of them will be in Crow Park in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Also to our team, to Suzanne, to May, to Elliot, Tavy, all the people in the back room who've made this series possible. The series was designed in association with the constituent groups of the CIC, and we had 6 events starting on the 31st of January. We had a little delay due to the Peace for the East, but we got together again in April. So the messages we had in 2018 were, number 1, driving digital transition. So in January we heard from Kingspan, we heard from the Scottish Government, the Scottish Innovation Centre, and the big message of the need to drive innovation. The roadmap was effectively launched. We then in April saw a commitment for each of the constituent bodies of the CIC. We had the chair of the CIC, and we had all of the senior chief executives or director generals of the various institutions here, sitting over here, making a commitment to the roadmap. What flowed from that was really interesting. They wrote a letter to Heather Humphreys, the Minister for Business Innovation, and asked for this roadmap to be implemented. And of course that's still going on. We then heard in May about standards. We had the NSAI here, and all the hard work that Ralph and his team in the Mirror Committee are doing. We had an event in August on education. Obviously education is key. We heard last month about the need for behavioural change. This is effectively a change programme. This is going to be a disruptive programme, and the need for that. And then of course today, the whole issue of commercial opportunity, which is very important. So I'm personally looking forward to working with people like Owen Vaughan, Michael Early, Arthur, all the people that are working in these BIM groups, we call them silos, to try and design a new programme for 2019. And perhaps we think a little bit outside the box on that one, but we need to keep that going. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about this event. Hands up, who's going to CitA Tech Live? Come on, everyone hand up. Everyone put their hands up. It's very important that you support this event. Huge amount of work went into putting this together. This is an event that goes beyond BIM. This is looking at technologies like smart cities, IoT. OSI need to be there. OSI, in my view, need to be public speaking at this event. We're hearing about reality technologies, AR, VR. We're going to be talking about automation, robotics. We're going to be talking about drones, geospatial, 3D printing. And only yesterday I spoke to Henke. Anyone heard of Henke? They're one of the biggest companies in the world that make adhesives. They have developed the biggest 3D printing lab in Dublin that's going to control all their 3D printing in the globe. So they're going to be manufacturing and printing components for buildings. Henke, remember that name? And hopefully they'll be with us in a few weeks' time. And of course, BIM innovations. So we're going to be hearing from, this is about an event for the tech companies to showcase the products that they have. Last week I was in London, in Excel, Digital Construction Week 2018, super event, 2,500 people per day, over 200 exhibitors, 6 live stages. But then again, they've got, what, 20 million people living in that country. So we have a small country here. So I want you to go back to your offices, if you could, and encourage your people to go to this event. So whether you're a quantity surveyor, or you're a contractor, or you're a subcontractor, or you're a building surveyor, or you're an architect, a civil or structural engineer, you should be at this, because this is going to give you an insight as to what's coming down the line. So, we have an interesting program. We work very hard to get people from around the world, and I do appreciate how busy your lives are now in practice. I mean, only 2 weeks after this event is the LCI event. There's lots going on. But we have presentations from Mark McDonald, from Solis, and so on. So we've got 6 keynotes looking at the 6 technology areas. We've tried to work hard to get that kind of gender balance as well. That diversity message is very important. The big thing for me next year and for this event is the need to consult and collaborate with other like-minded communities. Lean Construction Ireland, Women in BIM, the UK BIM Alliance, the BRE, the MBS. These are all organisations that talk digital as part of their message. And it's very important as we go forward in 2019 and beyond that we work with these people collaboratively, perhaps share programs like this, roadshows, events, and so forth. We're also going to be consulting with our members over the next few weeks, asking them 3 very simple questions. Asking you 3 very simple questions. How are we doing at the moment, CitA? Question 2, what can we do better? And question 3, what would you like us to do or talk about in 2019? We'll be definitely talking about this, and we'll be talking about it until we get the money to fund it. So we definitely have to keep talking about this roadmap, and talking to government about it as well. 2019 is going to be an exciting year as well because CitA BIM Gathering will be back in November. An event that's getting a lot of international recognition. So we hope to have a bigger, stronger gathering in 2019. The CitA SkillNet submission has been made to the government. We're hoping to get our 11th year of funding as we go forward in 2019. So again, your companies can avail of the CitA discount if you're going to be doing training in this area. We're also hoping to do an annual roadshow. It's a pity we don't have more time to do this, but it's very important that we partner perhaps with other communities to do a roadshow around the country again next year. We have a new CitA Academy being launched. Realising we're very busy, we're now going to launch that online, so now you can do your training in the comfort of your home or in your office. CitA have also been successfully involved in BIM A+. BIM A+ is a new European Masters in BIM, which has been delivered by 3 universities. Hopefully a new Irish university might be involved in the future. Portugal, Slovenia, and Italy. So 3 universities have come together based around the original idea that CitA had, the idea that, that you had the informatics masters where you share content online. So this program is going to be coming online in January, and it's going to actually give out scholarships to students who want to go to college and learn in this master's in the English language in any of those 3 countries. We're also going to be launching a new Building Smart International Individual Qualification in Open BIM. So look, please come to our CitA Tech Live and learn more about what we're going to be doing in 2019. For me, the big message for 2019 is 3 things. I believe CitA need to focus on 3 things that tick the box for this roadmap and going forward. Number 1, to attract new talent into our industry. There's not enough. More women into our industry, more diversity. So we need more people coming into it. We need to make our industry more attractive. So that whole educational piece is very important. Second thing, we need to integrate and collaborate better on what we do. We're not good at doing that. So this idea maybe, and by the way, I stole this idea from London last week, the idea of a national digital twin is something they're going to do in the UK through their Centre for Digital Britain. Why can't we do that ourselves here? We can do that ourselves. So we need to collaborate better. And lastly, you all need to start adopting advanced technologies at scale. These technologies, not just Revit. It's all the technologies we're talking about. So they're the 3 messages we hope to have for next year. So listen, thank you very much. We'll work very hard over the next few months to try and put together a program for you to attend next year. And thank you for those people also online. So we'll see you in Croke Park, yeah? Okay, great, thank you. I almost forgot to mention that CitA are supporting the Irish Construction ICE Awards, yes? and that CitA are partnering with the ICE Awards for the Bin Excellence category, and the closing date is the 30th of November. So you can go to the site www.iceawards.ie. Just put this mission as a great event last year. I hope you'll support that again next year. Thank you.
You what? I'm going to ask a person to be short. Huh? I'm going to ask somebody to give me a What?
I think since probably the summer finished, I've been looking at a bit more. This week I'm actually meet
It's been definitely down there, didn't it? Let me tell you, Karen doing is some claim. Donald is a walk. You look at Devil's Ladder. Mother was sweet fuck. I don't think it's that one from it's a crowning yard, a crowning yard, one from it across the terrain, past the two lakes.
Do you ever see the German war page?
I read about it, and it's on other things route, isn't it? Because you're on the main route here, there's another route across there. Where? I was saying actually in those I did all the drawing before everywhere. At night, better than the character I haven't done yet, my Brandon. I read about it when it called me home, we're rehearsing.
You can do it two ways.
I would have made do it.
And then the hard way as well.
I got a lot of unions now. Oh, you have one. I can see you next time.